Welcome to the Modern Classrooms Project podcast. Each week, we bring you discussions with educators on how they use blended, self-paced, and mastery-based learning to better serve their students. We believe teachers learn best from each other, so this is our way of lifting up the voices of leaders and innovators in our community. This is the Modern Classrooms Project podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Modern Classrooms Project podcast. My name is Tony Rose Deanna, and they them pronouns, a designated hype person here at MCP. And I am joined today by high school STEM educator and Modern Classrooms mentor Eileen Ng. And she also happens to be one of my favorite people. So welcome, Eileen.
Thank you so much, Tony Rose. I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me. So initially, I was only using traditional rubrics for lab reports and projects or presentations. For tests, like many other teachers, I was only allocating points to every question, giving partial credit, calculating that percentage at the end. But I also wrote a ton of comments. I would spend hours grading these tests, writing specific actionable feedback, trying to help them see where they went wrong and how they could craft a better response in the future. Those fine nuances that I felt I could add in the margins. One day, I was giving back a test in the last 5 minutes of class, and a student received his test, glanced at the back page, and then tossed it in the recycling bin on his way out. And I have to tell you, I was hurt. I was really hurt. Because I had spent hours grading that test, and I had written feedback on everybody's test, and it just made me feel like all of that was wasted. And the other thing it made me feel, it was really sad that for this student, that felt so final. It was the end of the learning journey. And I had a revision process that anybody was eligible for. And so he could have done a revision, asked for a retake, prepared. But for him, it was just so final. It was just so clear how he felt. And it was clear he didn't read a single comment I had written. He just wanted to know the grade. And that was it. And so I thought, how could I give this feedback? Because I'm not going to stop giving the feedback. It's really important. But in a way that he and other students want to read it, or maybe have to read it in order to find out how they did. A holistic picture of student learning that was impossible to ignore.
Could you walk us through the process of designing one of your visual rubrics? Because that's like a shift, right, in your head of like, oh, I don't want to make this text heavy. I want to make this a visual rubric. How did you create that? How did you design it? What are some elements or considerations that you found most important to include to effectively communicate learning targets and different levels of mastery visually?
Yes. So as I mentioned earlier, I definitely wanted to reduce the cognitive load. And so it couldn't be text heavy. And so I came up with the idea of a picture or maybe an infographic, something really user-friendly, as I mentioned earlier. So I was thinking of something I used to say to my students while debriefing their lab reports. And it was the same idea. Nobody wants to look at a data table of numbers and then the averages because you can't really see what's going on. And so I would say to them, a graph is worth 1,000 words. What is the story you are trying to tell with this graph? And so I thought about, well, what was the story I was trying to tell with my new feedback system? And I landed on, I just want them to know exactly what they know well and what they still don't know, without having to ask me. So it has to be that clear and self-explanatory. And then they could identify any patterns that, just like a graph draws out the patterns from the data, this picture would also draw out the patterns in their learning. Mastery is, I could teach this and answer any questions from the audience or students, or I can explain it very thoroughly with all the fine details and nuances of the concept or process. And then achieving is, I know the basic idea, any misconceptions are minor. And then the level beneath that, I have a general idea of how this works, but some of my misconceptions are major and really change the way the concept or process really works. And then beginning is I'm just starting to learn this. And so I had to define what that meant for biology. And I think all teachers do need to define those levels, because those words alone, proficient, it doesn't help the student understand what proficient is. And so I would keep referring to that and saying, well, could you teach it? Could you teach it to a friend? Could you teach it to me? Could you answer any questions that I have about this? And that really helped them think, oh, could I do that? No, I don't think I'm feeling confident enough, so I must be here. And so the visual rubric just helps match how they feel with how I feel. And hopefully that can be a great conversation starter. So I would actually like to read 4 student quotes from a survey I sent out. I sent it out in the middle of trimester 2, and then again at the end of the year. And here are 4 quotes. 1, it helped me set clear goals with a smaller range. 2, I think in the beginning of the year, it triggered my anxiety a lot, but I got used to it. It allowed me to grow more confident in my ability to learn and express that knowledge well. 3, I think it lowers my stress because sometimes a score out of 100 could make me feel really bad about my score. I don't feel frustrated, but instead I trust it because I know if I get a 2 out of 4, I did not understand the content. I actually like the grading system. And 4, it made me care less about grades and focus more on learning the course material. So those are direct student quotes, and that was really encouraging to me because the other goal I had was to reduce anxiety and stress in my classroom, and just to take that power away from grades and have assessment be, like I said before, a conversation starter. Students have this idea of this A as the ultimate goal, and their question is, what do I need to do to get to an A? Or why didn't I get an A on this? And they really don't know what that A entails or what it requires. And so with the explanation of the 4 levels, there's no magical formula. When you give points, you're subtracting, you have this total points, you divide the top number by the bottom number, and it can all be very complicated, and every teacher has their own way. It feels very obscure to the student. They know that some math is involved, but they just don't know how they arrived at the grade. Whereas the 4 levels of mastery largely do correspond to A, B, C, and D. And so suddenly that grade makes sense. Now, I didn't give a letter grade, but if I were to, it would align with where they are on their visual rubric, and they could probably come up with it themselves. So again, having that ownership, having that ability to assess yourself is really the goal here, for them to be independent learners, to know what they need to do to improve. Sometimes when a student gets a grade and either a parent or they say to themselves, like, how can I do better? Well, I'll study harder or do better. And that's just so hard for a student to hear. Well, how do I do better? How do I study? What does it mean to study more? And so just the whole idea of just giving them a really clear path forward, as you said. So grades no longer feel arbitrarily given by me as the teacher or mysteriously calculated with a formula they can't see, but legitimately earned through demonstration of mastery.
How are your parents and caregivers and families and other stakeholders responding to your visual rubrics? I'm so curious.
Honestly, I didn't get too much feedback from them. What I mostly got was some alarm over the grading portal. And so I wasn't going to talk about this in length in this podcast, or the process of converting these visual rubrics back to a percentage for my LMS is probably beyond the scope of this podcast. But basically, I populated my grade book with all numbers out of 4 for individual assignments. So they actually never saw an individual assignment percentage, and that was intentional. In doing that, I had to create a shadow assignment that had the actual percentage that was integrated in the grade, but not published. But I could not prevent my portal from using the grade, the score out of 4 as a percentage, even though it wasn't counted in the grade. And so this was producing a lot of 50s and 75%. And so I realized I needed to educate parents and caregivers early because I was experimenting with it during the year. I hadn't really thought to announce it. I was just trying out an idea and it was going well with the students. But what they would say to me is, my mom freaked out when she saw the 75. And then I said, wait. No, Miss Ng has this system. She has this weird system and it's really not a 75%. Please just talk to her. She will verify this. And I would. And so what I did is at back to school night, I talked to them and I said, hey, don't look at those numbers. I'm really trying to help them focus on the learning. And they were on board.
And I think that's it, right? It's just that communication piece of, again, it's not just our students who are worried about grades. It's literally everyone. I mean, we think about universities going into, university or college, like they look at transcripts and grades, right? So rightfully so. And I think that communication sometimes goes a long way. When you show your other stakeholders of what you're doing, then they have a better understanding. And then also opening that communication piece too, of like, if you have any other questions, like, let me know, right? Like, and also the fact that like students can advocate for themselves and say like, no, it's different. I can try to explain it to you, but if you want validation, if you want a confirmation from an adult, like talk to my teacher about it. So again, congratulations on the Edutopia publication. That is so dope. That's going to be in the show notes as well, y'all, so you don't have to do any Googling. So Eileen, what do you hope to see in the future and what goals do you have?
Yeah, I'm in this space where I am coaching and supporting teachers, and I really love that. I've gotten a couple of teachers implementing MCP. And so that is so beautiful because I work with mentees, but it's also beautiful to see that happening in my own school and now having kind of a cadre of educators I can bounce ideas off of. And I do have a very supportive administration and we have great discussions on how we can rethink our assessment tools and practices. And that's a school priority and a vision to think outside the box when it comes to assessment tools. And again, to talk about the potential of a new system, but also be aware of how it might require the education and the communication. And so that's a conversation that I'm really excited to continue having. And I feel that my dual roles as a teacher in the classroom, but also instructional coach, but also MCP mentor, just allows me to do that on so many levels, to see it locally in my school, but then also to think, hey, I'm in communication with Chicago educators, with an educator in Greece, and somebody in Africa who's got this like one room schoolhouse. And it's just amazing to see us all thinking and grappling with the issues and just really moving forward to a better way. You asked what goals I have or what I hope to see in the future. What I really want to see in the future is a world where students are not defined by a number or a letter, or they don't feel defined by that. I would like to see us think of new ways of reporting that better capture the essence of students in all their uniqueness and arrays and displays of talents and skills. We all know that every student is different, and yet these transcripts and these report cards are dry and they don't capture that, and they don't capture the life skills and the gifts and the talents. It's a piece of paper, and some big decisions are being made based on this paper. And so I'd like to be part of the next generation of educators who are really pushing for change.
Thank you so much for listening. Listeners, remember you can always email us at podcast@modernclassrooms.org. And you can find the links to topics and tools we discussed, as well as more info on this week's announcements and events, in the show notes for this episode at podcast.modernclassrooms.org. We'll have this episode's recap and transcript uploaded to the Modern Classrooms blog on Friday, so be sure to check there or check back in the show notes for this episode if you'd like to access those. And if you enjoy our podcast and it's been helpful in supporting you to create a blended, self-paced, mastery-based learning environment, we would love if you could leave a review. That does help other folks find our podcast. And of course, you can always learn the essentials of our model If you want to go beyond the podcast, through our free course at learn.modernclassrooms.org, and you can follow us on social media at Modern Class Proj. That's Proj. We are so appreciative of all the hard work you do for students and schools. Have a great week, and we'll be back next Sunday with another episode of the Modern Classrooms Project podcast.